speaking Spanish is important to Hispanic identity. Some time ago, I read an article by the Washington Post, published as an Instagram post, titled, "I thought speaking Spanish was important to my identity, then I became a parent." The author ends her story by saying, "There can be myriad reasons someone can't speak Spanish, but it will never take away their heritage and culture. It's in our blood." As many did in the comments, my friends thought the article was quite alienating. Some Latin American governments have spearheaded race admixture as a policy to whiten the population. Many people invoke it today to conceal episodes of racial discrimination in the region, but mestizaje began in the early colonial period, and despite the racialized intentions, its results are telling. Most Latin Americans consider themselves mixed. On average, Latinos in the US carry 18% Native American ancestry, 65.1% European ancestry, and 6.2% African ancestry. Of course, there's racism in Latin America. It has always been there and continues to be. But it is far-fetched to claim that Latinidad or Hispanidad belongs to one strict racial group or matters of blood. Hispanidad is learned, it's inherited from your environment and education by manners and metaphors. For instance, the son of two Lebanese parents in Colombia isn't a second generation Arab Colombian. He's a Colombian of Lebanese descent. The artist Gego, who some time ago had a retrospective exhibition at the Guggenheim, fled Nazi Germany to Venezuela in her late 20s. People back home consider Gego to be a full-on Venezuelan artist born in Hamburg, not a German based in Caracas. To become Hispanic, to access the many artifact stories and expressions that compose Hispanidad, you need an understanding of the Spanish language. Hispanics in the US have been depicted as an inferior and overly uniform group, but just because an ethnic group is categorized and racialized doesn't mean that bloodlines alone should define it. Adopting that mindset is to accept the oppressor's logic, falling into the paradox of white assimilation. You must become like us, but you will never truly be one of us. Now, how does this all connect to the Washington Post's Instagram carousel from last year? Well, one commenter who supported the author wrote that technically our heritage language is not Spanish. Spanish is the colonizer's language. If the conversation were about Yanomami or Mapuche identity, I'd understand the perspective. But the Spanish language was not forced onto us contemporary Hispanics, or let's say Portuguese onto today's Brazilians. Colonialism was undoubtedly violent and cruel, but we are its children, not its direct victims. To place the substance of Hispanidad or Latinidad before the ideas of Hispanic or Latin America came to be is simply ahistorical. No one can deny how important indigenous identity is in countries like Bolivia and Guatemala. However, it is one of the aspects that constitute the fluidity of Hispanidad and the ties each Hispanic nation has with the indigenous cultures of their territories vary greatly. Addressing the erasure these communities have faced and still face is a moral imperative, but framing this as a conflict over who truly incarnates Latin American culture is deceptive and misplaced. Look, there's no such thing as speaking perfect Spanish. There are so many dialects of the language that it's naive to think there's a standard, ideal, and universally correct Spanish. Just as Peruvians borrow words from Quechua and Argentinians borrow words from Italian in everyday speech, I applaud Spanglish as a way to communicate with others and express our inheritance. If the ancient inhabitants of the Iberian Peninsula made the language of Roman occupiers their own, why can't we Latin Americans in and out of the US do the same? All in all, Hispanidad is not about phenotypes or genetic ties to a land as claims to race or indigeneity are. Hispanidad is about shared customs, traditions, and artistic expressions. It's about practices. And the base practice that allows for communication and exchange that binds the many Hispanic communities of the world is the Spanish language. It allows Ecuadorians to watch Colombian telenovelas during the day, rock out to Mexican music at night, and feel both expressions as their own. We cannot ignore the ways of speech that sustain our culture and fuel our identity. We cannot allow for their erasure.